Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark. Campfire Stories, Volume 8, Story Number 1. There's always been the stories and sightings. We kind of joke about it even, nothing too concrete. I don't know if I truly believe in the hauntings, but logically speaking, if ghosts existed, a hospital is a likely location for them to be. Most of the stories revolve around a particular auditorium, and even more in our basement, lower level. Yes, that is where we keep the morgue. Personally, I've had a couple of experiences which the first two times I chalked up to me being tired, and then maybe the security team playing with me. So far, no one's owned up, and it happened three times more. Basically, I'll be doing my job just walking along a hallway, which is empty, and someone will call my first name. Usually it's at regular speaking volume. Nothing's stereotypically ghostly, but I always get an irrational adrenaline burst and my breathing picks up, which is how I started associating this as something abnormal. Once I was alone in a waiting room, and I remember being exceptionally sleepy. Just sitting watching some random infomercial on TV and drowsing off a bit, when suddenly I heard someone very clearly speak my name immediately to the right of me. I was leaning on my left hand, so I was slightly turned away from the right, and I recall immediately snapping awake and looking around. All the lights were on, TV playing, no one there. I repeat, it never feels creepy or bad, just weird. One other time that stands out was when I was walking along an older hallway, part of the original hospital structure before they built the new wings. And this particular one has old uniforms hanging in frames along the walls as part of the decor. We use a green lighting policy during night shift, so lights only turn on directly above you and in front of you and turn off as you move. So it's a bit creepy when you're alone. I remembered I was writing someone in my clipboard, so I was distracted. Someone had called my name and I had responded something like, "Yeah, what's up?" And after a few seconds with no response, I turned around to check in with whoever needed me. Obviously, the hallway was empty and all the lights behind me were off. I sometimes like to think it's maybe someone who wants to acknowledge me for an interaction I had with them. That would be kind of nice, but then who knows who this is that keeps calling my name. Story number 2. To begin, my dad works at a local clinic on a Navy installation in my town. The place is really old and reeks of asbestos and isopropyl alcohol. And when you walk through it, the air surrounding you almost seems to graze your skin as you move. The place is just really creepy. The clinic has a storage room connected to a set of offices that used to be the morgue. On occasion, there would be something odd or off-putting in there, like unused dental trays with traces of rust, or a rather foul odor would hang over the place. The whole place was like something out of a video game. My experience took place when I was about 8 or 9 years old, after hours when my dad was working overtime. My dad was going to a coworker's office across the building, and because the building creeped me out, I went with him. When we were walking, he hung a turn and began to head towards the storage room door to take a shortcut to the office. Even the door was creepy, as the small windows on the front were covered in yellow and black caution tape to stop nosy patients from peeking inside. As we entered, the temperature dropped a good 5 degrees. The whole place got really cold and really quiet. As my dad was walking along, I hung behind, a little sluggish from being a bit unsettled. My dad, or what I thought was my dad, called my name to speed me up. The first red flag I noticed was that the voice came from behind me. As I looked back, I saw a bit of movement, but I dismissed it as the light of the fluorescent lamps dancing over the metallic objects scattered about. Moving on, I began to feel deeply unsettled, like someone distant was watching me. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed more movement, this time in the direction of one of the shelves. At this point, I was stopped dead in my tracks by fear. Small crackling sounds like speaker feedback began to fill the surrounding air. Soon my actual dad called for me to hurry up, and I gathered my senses and hurried along, trying not to focus on the little popping sounds as much. I'm not sure what happened, but I'm sure it was connected to that room being a morgue at one point. What do you think? Next story. Let me start with a bit of backstory. About 9 months ago, I began working as a hospital security guard at a major hospital in my city. It's been the most exciting and enjoyable job I've ever had. I'm incredibly grateful for it as I've made many new friends and accumulated countless stories to share. The saying, if you love your job, you never work a day in your life, really rings true for me. I've had such a variety of experiences, from arresting trespassers to dealing with mental health patients and searching for missing individuals. The list goes on. But those stories are for another day. Today, I want to talk about something different, my experience with the paranormal. Before I started this job, I was already intrigued by the idea of paranormal activity in a major hospital. I mean, people pass away in hospitals every day, so you'd think it would be a hotspot for ghostly encounters, right? I wish I could say I've seen ghosts chasing me down the halls, or bodies mysteriously moving on their own in the morgue, but honestly, nothing quite like that has happened. Still, I wouldn't be writing this if I'd experienced nothing at all. To give you a better understanding of the hospital's layout, let me explain where security is stationed. There are four main buildings we cover. The first is the main hospital, which houses the emergency room and over 1,000 beds for both kids and adults. We typically have at least 8 guards handling calls in this building, with one guard stationed in the emergency room at all times, since that's where most calls come from. It's worth noting that I'm in Canada, so anyone can come to the hospital for any reason free of charge. The second building, located across the street, is an 8-story medical clinic that requires just one guard. This guard also has to patrol the adjacent old clinic building, which is now primarily used for treating children with eating disorders. This is where the story I'm about to share takes place. The last building is the cancer clinic, which requires 2 guards at all times and is the closest to the medical clinic if assistance is needed. When I first started the job and was shown around the various buildings, the old clinic, which we'll call the asbestos clinic due to its history of asbestos issues, immediately stood out to me. It's a building that, in my opinion, should have been demolished long ago. During my initial walkthrough, a fellow guard told me that this building was haunted by a young girl who took her own life on the second floor. He also mentioned that the basement was haunted. The whole building used to be a tuberculosis sanatorium back in the 50s and 60s, with tunnels in the basement that were once used to transport bodies. About a month ago, it was my turn to work at the clinic during a night shift, and I was determined to experience some paranormal activity. I had done countless patrols of the asbestos clinic before, but nothing much had happened, aside from the elevators occasionally opening on their own, which was apparently normal, but that night things changed. I heard plenty of stories from other guards about strange occurrences in the clinic, but I had never experienced anything myself. I decided to do my patrol at 3 a.m., which is often said to be the prime time for paranormal activity. I began my patrol by walking around the exterior of the building, checking all the entrances to ensure they were locked. The building closes relatively early, around 8 p.m., so by then it should be completely empty. However, I noticed that one of the exterior doors was slightly open. This concerned me because it had been closed during my first patrol. The building doesn't have any interior cameras, so when something like this happens at night, I have to check every unlocked room inside to make sure no one is in there. I entered the building and started my patrol of the first floor, checking every door and hallway. No one was there. As I approached the elevator to go up to the second floor, I heard a faint creaking sound like a door opening. I immediately radioed my team lead, informing her that I found an open door and was hearing noises. I told her I was going to conduct a thorough patrol, and she sent one of the guards from the cancer clinic, whom we'll call Fred, to assist me. After searching the first floor again and finding nothing, Fred arrived. He told me he would start searching the third and fourth floors while I covered the second floor and basement. As I was searching the second floor, I heard the same creaking noise again, the sound of a door opening. I radioed Fred to come down. still not considering the possibility of anything paranormal. We've had incidents of homeless people breaking in to find a place to sleep, though it's rare for them to target the asbestos clinic since it's usually locked. We searched every room on the second floor but found nothing. After thoroughly checking the entire clinic, we concluded that no one was inside. Fred returned to the cancer clinic, and my team lead made a joke that it was probably just a ghost. That got me thinking. This might be the perfect time to continue my ghost hunting. I went back to the building, determined to capture some activity. I sat down in a chair on the second floor, waiting to see if anything would happen. After about 10 minutes of nothing, I got bored and decided to head down to the basement. The basement is an eerie place, filled with tunnels that mostly lead to nowhere now. I decided to explore one of them since I'd never done it before, and it seemed like the perfect time. Once I exited the elevator, I made my way to one of the locked doors, leading to the longest tunnel. Most of the tunnels were completely blocked off, but this one stretched on. I unlocked the door and ventured down the tunnel, taking note of my radio beeping to indicate that it had not lost signal, a common issue in basement areas. As I reached the end of the tunnel, my flashlight started to flicker. I decided to stand still and listen, and to my shock, I heard a blood-curdling female scream coming from the start of the tunnel. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I turned around, pointing my flickering flashlight back toward the entrance, and started running toward the scream. When I reached the entrance, I tried to radio my team lead, but my radio was still out of signal. I looked around the basement and noticed that one of the doors was open. This door was supposed to be locked, with only security having access to the keys. I looked inside the room, but no one was there. My heart was racing. I closed the door and headed back upstairs to get a radio signal. I was still unsure if what I experienced was paranormal. Once I was back on the main floor, I radioed my team lead to let her know what happened. She sent Fred back to help me investigate the source of the scream. When he arrived, we went back to the basement. I showed him the room that had been opened, and we both noticed a very distinct and strong smell, like that of a decomposing body. Having spent time in the hospital morgue, I was all too familiar with that smell. We searched the room but found nothing. Fred joked that the room might have been used for tuberculosis patients who didn't make it, but in truth, none of us were sure what that room had been used for. We determined that everything was fine, and I decided I'd spent enough time in the asbestos clinic for one night. Ever since that experience, I rushed through my patrols in the basement, as that smell still lingers every time I pass by that room. Next story. I've worked for a hospital system for the last 6 years in IT. For 4 of those years, I was a field tech, level 2 support, and a field tech lead. We had to be at the hospital Monday through Friday and had a 24/7 on-call rotation on top of that. Even during the height of the pandemic, when the rest of IT got to work from home, we were there. That last part is relevant, in my opinion. Even before the negative emotions, pain, death, and suffering that skyrocketed during COVID, the first hospital I worked at definitely had its fair share of resident spirits. It was one of the medium-sized hospitals in this hospital system. I can't say I got chased down by ghosts or anything crazy like what you would see in a movie, but the weirdness was definitely there. The freakiest thing was when we were helping convert the old ICU to the new cath lab. As soon as the nurse call vendor had the system installed there, we started getting phantom calls to the nurse's station. Mind you, there were no patients in these rooms yet, and no staff working there. More than once, we had the project manager go running into a room to tell the techs installing the PCs to leave the call buttons alone, only to find no one working in that particular room. After it opened, things got even weirder. Of course, the phantom calls kept coming, but other things would happen that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. One example was when I was working in a room that had recently had a code blue happen. The patient didn't make it. Anyway, I was trying to work out why we couldn't get any PCs to connect to the network in this one room. The fluke said the port had a connection and was on the generic VLAN. The original PC was reimaged several times, so obviously I had a perfectly working Ethernet card, and we would put a brand new PC in there. But I digress. While I was troubleshooting, the door suddenly slammed shut. They opened inwards, and I had it wide open, so you could literally have to be in the room to shut the door or grab it on the way out and pull it closed. The room got instantly chilly, and the thing that made me get out of there as quick as possible was when I literally saw depression form on the bed as if someone had sat on it. The nurses and patient techs at the nurses' station had a good laugh at my expense over that one. I came running out and just left my cart with all my tools on it and told them, I'm going to need someone to go get my stuff out of that room because I ain't going back in by myself. I've had many of the strange experiences at that hospital, and especially at the one I currently work at as a project manager. And let me tell you a story about that. The hospital I'm working at now is a very old hospital. The original building on the campus was built over 100 years ago. There are now 9 buildings that are of carrying age from, well, 100 up to 2 years in age. Plus, there are several ancillary office buildings that are rented to practice and used as administrative offices. The oldest building is where the creepiest stories are spread around by staff. The top floor of that building was at one time basically an apartment for the founding doctor. It's now used as office space. So there are typically only folks there from 9 to 5 during the week. The head of security for the hospital told me that they would get calls often from that floor even when no one was there. It's also important to understand that you can only access that floor by swiping your badge in the elevator. Very few people outside of those that office in there have that kind of access. Anyway, I got a message to come to the security office by one of the security guards because they had a call coming in from there. This was around 6 p.m. So I ran over, and it's important to note that IT and the security observation room switchboard are literally right next to one another, and they wait for me to get there to answer it on speaker. There was what can only be described as a far-off voice that was being somewhat obscured by static. Despite that it was easy to make out what the voice was saying, "Help me, I'm lost." It repeated that over and over until they hung up. They said that was what always came through when that call came. They also always sent someone to check, and of course, it was always empty. I never directly saw anything up there myself, but I was setting up a laptop docking station for a new director, and I was alone, and it certainly felt like I wasn't. Almost like I was being watched, but not in a scary way, if that makes sense. We also have a sky bridge to an adjacent hospital for children for emergencies that our NICU is not equipped to handle. I've heard the cry of a baby in that hallway when both doors were shut. Fortunately, I was with 2 of my other techs and they heard it too, so we know we weren't just hearing things. Finally, the most recent thing was in the dialysis unit. Well, the whole floor is for renal patients, and they have a big dialysis room up there. But we just call the whole floor dialysis. This is important because the dialysis part is pretty open, so they can be observed the whole time. The thing I saw happened in the section with rooms. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, I was refreshing a PC in one of the rooms. There was a patient in there, but they were pretty out of it, so I wasn't bothering them. I suddenly heard the door open, which was weird because it was already open. I turned around and saw a nurse walk in. I was taken aback because she was dressed like a white skirted outfit. If you don't know, modern nurses wear scrubs and would be sent home if they even attempted to wear a skirt. Well, she never said a word to me. She walked over to the patient, looked him over, and then it looked like she fluffed his pillow a bit. She then strolled out of the room without ever saying a word to me or even acknowledging my existence. When I poked my head out of the door, she was gone. After I finished doing what I was doing, I went to the charge nurse to basically ask her, "What the hell?" Her response chilled me. "Oh, you saw her? No one's seen her in over a month. We were kind of hoping she moved on." I'm paraphrasing a bit, but that was the gist of it. Apparently this ghostly nurse who checks in on patients is well known on the renal ward. Next story. I also used to work in a very old hospital that was being used as the state psych hospital. One incident I remember. We had a small number of patients on each unit due to them being psych patients, and they required very close supervision, 24/7. We also did rounds and charted the patient's location every 15 minutes. That night, everyone was in bed asleep. Just after doing rounds, I heard a loud crashing sound coming from down the hall. It repeated several times in a row. Imagine the old metal bed rails they used to have on hospital beds, and a very strong patient shaking it and banging it against the metal heater, as if they were angry about being confined and trying to get the rail off. That was what it sounded like, except it was loud. I ran down there to check, knowing that it was an empty room, but concerned that a patient had gotten in there. It was in a rage for whatever reason. The room was empty, as were all the rooms around it, and every patient on that hall was asleep. I did call the unit above and below to see if they had been dealing with behaviors or heard anything, but they both said it had been quiet. Well, the next morning on my way out, I ran into two other coworkers who told me they had both had paranormal experiences around the same time. One of them had actually even seen an apparition of a woman. At least I didn't have that experience, thank God. Next story. So, I went to a private Catholic high school in Oklahoma. The school itself was built before the state was a state. It's over 110 years old, and it used to be a convent. So, it's the textbook setup for haunting stories. So, before I went there, I had heard stories of the school being haunted, mainly the fourth floor. They always had these legends about things that happened there. They always talked about the pictures on the fourth floor never being straight. And if you fixed it, the picture would get messed up again. And if you took a ball up there, it would be pushed around. So my first day, part of the orientation was taking a tour of the school and seeing the haunted bits. There were two places they talked about, the fourth floor and the morgue in the basement. You can understand the morgue cause, dead people. So first day went by and nothing special happened. 3 years later, while I was doing a film class, we went up to shoot a video up there after school and late into the night. We were all joking that we were going to get video of something. About halfway through shooting, me and one of the actresses were talking and we felt like someone blowing on our ears. We spun around and there was no one there. We chalked it up to the wind. So we kept shooting and we're moving setups and we see a painting tilted, so we fixed it. And after the next shot, one of the other students points out that the picture we just fixed was tilted again. So we fixed it again. And in the middle of the next take, one of the actors screamed, saying they just watched the picture tilt by itself. Then we all heard footsteps come up the big staircase, and we heard it go down the hall into a room. One of the students snapped a quick picture, and most of us swear that you could see the outline of a nun in a pitch black room. As a matter of fact, the school, it's the Mount St. Mary's Catholic High School in Oklahoma, built in 1903. So yeah, the culprit turns out might be a nun. Yeah, a nun. Next story. So anyway, just over a year ago, my father had a heart attack. The cardiac part of the hospital goes in one way and out another, so it's pretty hard to find the right door when you're new to visiting that ward. The first time he was admitted, my mother and I found it easy to get there. There's normally a lot of staff around to help. However, the second or third time he had gone into the ward, they get taken straight there if they have chest pains and go to the emergency department. It was at a less busy time in the hospital, as we were dropping off his medication rather than visiting. Now, I just want to give a clear picture of the hospital. It has 3 entrances, 2 at the front and 1 at the back, with various car parks based around these doors. The hospital is made up of an old and new building which are connected by a bridge. The cardiac ward is in the old part of the hospital. However, this door has limited parking. So, we do go in through the back door rather than the one which supposedly goes straight up to the cardiac ward, as the parking around there is full, taking us into the new building. This means that not only do we need to make our way to the top of the hospital, but also to the other side. So we weren't sure where we were going and asked a nurse, who gives us a muddled version of the directions to the cardiac ward. And we follow them for a while and end up completely lost. So we ask another nurse, who gives us more directions, and we're lost again. We're both a stereotypical idiot female when it comes to following directions. So we try following signs, but we aren't sure where we are, as neither of us is familiar with the part of the hospital we have made our way into. Eventually, we end up in an elevator which looks like a service one, as it has a sliding mesh door rather than the solid metal ones. The buttons claim that they can take us back to where we came from, so we take it. This puts us at the other end of a corridor that we have been on earlier, so we take another elevator to put us down to the right floor, which ended up not being the right floor. We now have the option of going to floor 0, which my mom informs me is the morgue, as you need a key to get down there, or floor 3, unless we want to go higher up. We press to take floor 3 and end up in this empty white hallway with a disused end-of-life cancer ward. Creepy. Very creepy. And of course I'm creeped out. So we're in this white hallway with an old ward, beds and equipment abandoned, an old flight of stairs going up to somewhere you can't see, and there's no sign posted, a set of double doors at the end of the hall, and an older couple in their 50s wearing reasonably modern clothes. The man looking into the ward with his hand on the woman's shoulder, and the woman just stood face to the wall. My mother looks around and suggests we go find someone to ask where we go from here, and does not notice this creepy couple standing right in front of us until I point them out. They do not acknowledge us in the same way she did not acknowledge them. She then goes to walk down the corridor as I'm contemplating what the hell I should do, because I don't want to stay on my own, but I don't want to go through the doors. And then this nurse in a uniform that clearly is not the same as the ones as the hospital opens the door just wide enough to get through, walks out into the corridor, looks us right in the face and says, "You should not be down here with us." I tell my mom to get back in the elevator, but she tries to ask the nurse where we need to go. The nurse replies with the highest button, so we get in and press the one she said. While this is taking us God knows where, I have a bad feeling about what just happened, so I try and make sense of it by asking if the nurse uniform means that she works in a specific area or has higher training. My mom used to work at the hospital cleaning, so she's seen most of the uniforms worn. She replies no, and that the nurse maybe came from another hospital for a training program or to help out. The elevator opens, and we gotta walk down another empty corridor. This time we bump into a nurse wearing the usual uniform walking back towards a different elevator. She stops us going any further and tells us we're on the floor with the operating rooms and we can't stay up there. We tell her that we are lost and get into the elevator with her, which puts us in a completely different part of the hospital where we need to be. Problem solved, apart from what I'm convinced was an encounter with the paranormal. A few months ago my dad was in the hospital again, and during visiting hours, one of his nurses came to talk with us. We had just been talking about what my parents described as a weird experience, and my dad asked the nurse if she knows where we could have been. She thinks that we were playing a joke on her and tells us that all that is on those floors of the hospital are janitor corridors, which only have cupboards for cleaning supplies, no wards. When she realizes that we are serious, she says that maybe we bumped into the hospital ghost. An old nurse who has apparently been seen on the children's ward when a child is dying. After she leaves, the child makes a full recovery. I've heard of this story before, about a kind spirit who helps others, and I can 100% say that whatever we saw was not kind and did not want us around. Of course, I can't be sure that it really was paranormal, and not just the love of the paranormal being biased, but it didn't feel right. They weren't in old-fashioned clothes, see-through or violent towards us, but I had this feeling of complete dread when we stepped out of that elevator. That coupled with the fact that my mom didn't see the couple straight away, that the nurse said the area does not exist, and the fact that neither of us can remember the facial features of anyone we saw on that floor. Just the clothing and hair color tell me that what we saw was not normal or good. I now have an absolute fear of going anywhere on my own in that hospital, just in case I see anything else that I'd rather not. I still get the creeps just thinking about it. Next story. I work as security for a hospital in Texas. This hospital has seen its fair share of deaths and freaks. We've had more than enough tragic, near-miss, and absolutely preventable deaths. We get at least one meth addict talking about demons every single week. I started working as a man who seriously wasn't into the paranormal scene. I knew that some things couldn't be explained, but that 99.999% could. To this day, I still look for those explanations before deciding something is spooky. I'm going to give a quick list of reported spooky areas, the events in them, and the general time period before I get to what made me really consider that the paranormal does exist. This all happened within 2 years, not too long. Primarily, the areas would be closed, empty, as in no inner walls, no rooms, no nothing, in one of our three towers, the ER and our new office. Primarily, but not exclusively. The first 6 weeks, this is in the ER, non-auto doors opening on their own to let people through, bathrooms that lock themselves with deadbolts, can't lock and close, and they're too stiff to just trigger because you closed it hard. Now, this is a closed unit, heard all sorts of noises of movement, the odd groan, the moan or whimper, and general sense of being watched. I ran into something that looked like a staff member I'd never seen before or since, staring dead into his little rolling trash can. Completely motionless, expressionless, dead fish-like. When the fragment of a thought to look into his trash can rose, I felt every single fiber of my body slam my mind with a heavy "don't." Never felt that before or since, and I faced knives, potential shooters, and built men on PCP completely unarmed and alone. Then there's the hallways. Secondary footsteps when I'm walking alone down a hallway. Different gear doesn't affect it, nor is it recreated in similar, seemingly the same circumstances. Now for the next year, I mostly dealt with the same type of things as in the first 6 weeks, minus the trash can boy. Seemed like a pretty steady frequency. Now starting from 2 months ago, we're back in the ER, same thing as the first 6 weeks. The hallway, same as the first 6 weeks. And then there's the closed unit. Since it's unused, I saw a female in scrubs enter a room on the far side of the west hallway. Check every single room, closet, and bathroom, and I found nothing. I see the same woman perform the same movement on the opposite end of east hallway. Another time rounding with another officer, we clearly see a bare, white pair of feet peeking from a shower. Quickly pull the shower curtain and find nobody. While walking with a different officer, I turn the corner and check behind me, and I see an older white female in the act of crawling towards me with her right hand reaching to my left ankle. I estimated that was about 6 inches from contact. It was gone when I turned around. Now, this is a new office, and I often hear deliberate people like mostly dropping things that aren't on the ground and clear knocking sounds from empty hallways. The door to empty halls open by themselves. I hear a non-existent metallic object drop between two offices on an open side. I saw the reflection of a nurse walk across a window in such a way that would put her on our side and through a wall. Missing keys that appear in a 5-minute check location. Well, I was the only one there. Probably more. Yesterday our new office was empty for 2 or 3 minutes. Hardly anyone had access, and of those who do, hardly any of them had access to our director's office. When I returned, I walked through the closed side as usual. Our broom was leaning against the door and smacked my hip when I opened the door, and our director's door was wide open. Only officer was visible on camera somewhere else, and our director was preoccupied somewhere else. Audible noises were very active the rest of the day. Today I had an unsettling feeling that I couldn't avoid. This happened during the 3 hours I was in there. I found the small trash can by me moved a solid foot while I was alone. That haunted door opened itself twice when I made sure it was closed each time. When I left to go somewhere more populated, I heard frantic running right behind me as soon as I opened the door. I closed it immediately, out of surprise, but saw nobody from the door window, which can see everywhere one could walk. To be clear, I had an instinctive reaction to jump and use the door as a shield before I even really knew that I was moving. This has been escalating like nuts within the last couple of months, but I'm not sure why. Since before I was hired, multiple officers and even medical staff have had unique and shared experiences, some different from my own. The two other supervisors saw the same shadow person, but never knew until I told them that the others saw the same thing. Then something else happened. I was just walking behind a doctor. It is down a hallway. This is a middle-aged doctor, and we hit an intersection with another hallway. There are no doors in the immediate area around the intersection. Despite this, he somehow disappeared within the 4 seconds that it took before I turned the same corner. I didn't hear any heavy footfalls. That implies running, and there are no doors. He should have reached by then, particularly in that hallway, as the only doors would be a good 12 seconds or so going at his pace. I thought I was walking behind a doctor, but now I'm not so sure. Then in our security office, I heard some footsteps in the back. Half that we keep the door closed. A night shift, there's not usually a reason for being back there, so I opened the door. Nobody. And the footsteps stopped. I closed the door and went to walk away, but heard the footsteps again. I could hear the footsteps go back and forth down the short hallway. When I listened harder, I could even hear the heel flat sound of casual walking. Tap, 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 tap. I threw the door open this time when the steps came up to the door, and there was nobody there. I said out loud, "Hey, stop being so loud when I'm the only one here," and left the office to do a round around the hospital. No footsteps when I returned with another officer. One day, I get a call to unlock a bathroom on one of our towers. Now, there's a women's restroom on every floor of one of our towers, and all of them have a habit of locking by themselves. They are all a deadbolt that requires a decent amount of force, and they resist slamming. Believe me, we tried it. We've even stocked the cameras to see if someone did it, but I've seen multiple times that people will leave the bathroom normally, someone will come and try the door, and the next people entering will be security with the keys. So my partner's supervisor and I recognized that this was for one of those bathrooms. We brought our skeptic officer with us and went to unlock one of these doors. We knocked and called to anybody inside before trying the handle and finding it locked. We opened it with a key and found nobody inside. The skeptic couldn't find a good reason for it, especially considering it's only ever been the women's bathroom, which there's a total of 5 of them, and they all have the same rough location per floor of a single tower. No other restroom does this, and no other tower has this issue. But then, not too long ago, I was alone in our office, and I began to leave to do a round. It was maybe 3 steps from the door, and I heard a distinct sound of a person knocking. Not wood being knocked on, but someone knocking, one of those little tunes that people do. It took me like about 4 seconds to open the door, but nobody was there. In that time, someone would have had to sprint to get out of eyesight, and that's only in one direction. When I asked a nearby staff member that was dealing with visitors if they saw someone move from our direction, she denied it. I had already been hearing quite a bit of extra noise in the spooky side of our office, but I'd been actively pretending not to notice it until then. Needless to say, I felt uncomfortable knowing that I had just walked through a haunt or something. Now, my supervisor apparently saw something. He was in the office with the lights off with one of his 2 officers, with the other having gone somewhere not long before. After a few minutes, he saw somebody with a similar build to the officer that was out of the office, standing right at the door to the haunted section. But neither of the 2 heard the door open. He claimed that he assumed that his outside officer had returned, and even mentioned how quick his return was to the person at the door. Apparently, when he looked and spoke to it, the person turned and walked into the property room. This was unsettling because 1, the old, which is in the haunted section, and new on our side property rooms are the most haunted rooms in our office, and 2, the door was only cracked open, meaning that the person would have had to walk through the door. Naturally, that's when he turned on the lights and investigated the property room, finding nothing and nobody. Based on his expression and way of speaking, I do believe him. The officer that he mistook that thing for was fine and was acting normally right next to me that whole night. Now, there's 3 of us in our office, including my supervisor, and some days are worse than other. And there was one day that they're having a heyday with the noises. One of the noises sounds like a pen being dropped in the property room after we were throwing pens around on our own. When my partner, supervisor, and I were facing each other, I was looking down the hallway while his back was facing the hallway. Due to the low red lighting, I would see flickers of what I thought was movement in the new property room, but they would be gone when I focused on the location. That is until I focused on the area and saw a humanoid head and shoulders peeking out from inside the new property room. It looked like a 3D black void in the shape of a human, but still seemed to reflect the red light to its right like an actual object. When I made eye contact with it, it slinked back into the property room, pulling an arm that I hadn't noticed it using to lean over it. I debated on whether I even wanted to bring it up to my supervisor, but I realized that the red light was now reflecting what looked like the door, which would mean the door was closed. I asked him if the door was closed, and he said it was. I eventually stood up and checked, and the door was closed. With flashlight on, I opened the door, turned on the light, and saw nothing abnormal inside the room. That means that a figure similar to what was seen yesterday by someone else was also seen by me passing through a closed door, but it had totally different movements. I hate to say it, but it feels like it's moved from the other side of the hallway and has claimed the new property room. The constant sounds heard by all three of us gives me the feeling that it isn't content with just taking a new room, probably going to spend the least amount of time in this office as possible tonight. Then I remembered I had another experience. This was a couple of weeks ago. It was our pediatric ER, which is technically part of the main building, but it's really only accessible from stepping outside and taking a walk, or going through a long hallway far away from any area a visitor would have any reason to be in. Also, this was about 2 a.m., so visitors were not allowed, and any that were around would be hiding in the patient's room hoping not to be noticed. Certainly nowhere near the hallway to the pediatric ER. I was approaching the pedi ER from inside, meaning that I'd be going down the hallway. I saw no visitors in the wide open area that surrounds the hallway entrance, and almost all sound from outside the hallway dies the second the doors close behind you. Imagine my surprise when, well, after the door closed behind me, but while I'm still only a third of the way through the hallway, I hear a child laughing behind me. I estimate the voice to be a young child, but older than a toddler. It had that giggle laugh kids have when they're growing up, but haven't become self-conscious of how they sound yet. It also sounded like it came from hip height, which tends to be that age range. Naturally, I turned around. I didn't immediately jump to thinking it was a ghost, but I knew for a fact that no adults were near me, and having a kid off on their own, following grown men into an isolated area just wasn't a recipe for anything good. I don't know what I expected, because I know there weren't any kids around either, but my job is the first thing I think of when in uniform. Of course, there is no kid behind me. Due to this job, my right ear is a bit hard of hearing, so I assumed that I heard something from the pedi ER and just got confused. Again, hardly any noise even enters this hallway, but anything, maybe not ghost or... Unfortunately, this was clearly not the case when I entered the ER, and I was ambushed with the sounds of 2 or 3 infants just crying their little heads off. To be clear, the hallway is so soundproof that I didn't hear them until I opened the door into the unit. Nothing in this hospital has imitated a child so far. I haven't experienced, I haven't heard of it. This was a brand new experience that happened only when I was by the pedi ER and completely isolated. I probably would have quit if I did see a child that wasn't real, alive, whatever, though I haven't quit despite everything else. I probably should have quit, but what you count as too far, basically normal, are really based on past experiences. So I'm hoping that the stay, whatever it is, stays far away from becoming basically normal.